Hello and welcome to the Monday Night Review. We had a brief pause last week while I was working on my skincare course that I'm running over the next 2 months, but I'm back with episode 18, which I'm recording from bed because I have a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little under the weather, I guess. And today we're going to be talking about Marie LaVeau, who sometimes is called the Witch Queen of New Orleans. Now, once again, I've been influenced by my mother, who sometimes gets earworm. We were actually walking through Hinton Ampner, and she started singing this song by Redbone called The Witch Queen of New Orleans. If you haven't heard it, go and have a listen. It's pure 70s, not factually accurate in any way. But it kind of made me go into a Google hole about the woman behind the myth and the many stories of a high priestess of voodoo who lived in the swamps by Louisiana. According to the song, she lives in a little hut, but in fact, that's not true at all. So this is going to be quite the history lesson, because to understand Marie LaVeau, New Orleans, and the time and culture in which she lived, I just want to talk a bit about voodoo, which is often misunderstood. I see people, even companies who should know better, sharing misinformation about voodoo and not understanding it's a legitimate religion, though it does incorporate some of the rituals people associate with its scarier side. Voodoo is primarily about protection from illness, bad luck, and misfortune. And it's a combination of West African religions brought over to the Caribbean and the southern United States by slaves, mixed up with Christianity they adopted or were forced to adopt through Code Noir, which I'm going to go into later, and the traditions of the indigenous people that they lived and often worked beside. In the 1700s, there were hundreds and thousands of people enslaved in the American South, but also in Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, and other South American territories. And it was the Haitian Revolution that began in 1791 that was the most significant influence on the creation of New Orleans voodoo. There's frightening stories of the revolution that heightened the fear of the religion for the white community. The Haitian Revolution was particularly unpleasant for the whites involved, which is frankly no more than they deserve. So for LaVeau, this blended with her Christianity. She was a devout Catholic all her life, and contrary to popular misconceptions, this wasn't incompatible with the practice of voodoo. Also, frankly, if you want to talk about bonkers rituals, Christians are in no position to throw stones. So Marie LaVeau was born in around 1801. There's no exact record of her birth, but that's what historians have narrowed it down to, about 1801. She was a woman of colour who was the first in her family to be born free. Her great-grandmother had come to New Orleans as a slave from West Africa in 1743, and her grandmother, Catherine, eventually wound up being bought by Francois Pommet, a free woman of colour and successful entrepreneur. Now, this wasn't unusual. LaVeau herself would own several slaves during her lifetime. She's a real symbol of how incredibly diverse New Orleans was and still is. A free woman of colour from African, Native American and French descent. Though, I mean, it needs to be said that there's still a lot that separates blacks and whites in New Orleans at the time, social housing to name but one small aspect of it. New Orleans was founded in 1718 by Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne de Bienville of the French Mississippi Company and was ceded to the Spanish Empire in 1763 when it became Nueva Orleans, until it briefly returned to French rule in 1803. And all this was happening on land that was originally inhabited by Native Americans who understandably were reluctant to leave. In the 1710s, the import of African slaves into New Orleans began, and though they were governed by a strict pre-Jim Crow French slave law called Code Noir, which dictated social activities, the religion for both free people of colour and slaves of all French colonies, in a way there was freedom of society because of the mixtures of cultures. It had more of a cultural mix than anywhere else in the South. So the slave culture of Louisiana was distinctive, and it gave rise to a unique Afro-Creole society. And its French heritage made a hub for trade, both physically and culturally. This melting pot was a forerunner of New Orleans, which is still cross-cultural, multilingual place, considered to be the most unique in America. It became part of the United States in 1803 as part of the Louisiana Purchase, near the time of when Marie LaVeau was born. At the time, interracial relationships were not uncommon in New Orleans. Though interracial couples were forbidden to marry in society, New Orleans residents were completely accepting of unmarried cohabitation as an acceptable way of life, which wasn't acceptable in loads of other places. So interracial couples couldn't get married, but they could cohabit, have children, live together as a married couple with no real comeback. In 1819, Marie married Jacques Paris. I'm assuming he would have said Jacques Paris, but a free man of mixed race. They had two daughters, Félicité, born in 1817, and Marie Angélie, born in 1822, but both are presumed to have died young, as there's no further records of them. Between March 1822 and November 1824, her husband Jacques dies or disappears, and for the rest of her life, Marie refers to herself as the widow Paris. There's conflicting info about how many children she had. Some say up to 15. It's more likely that she had 7 in total. Not long after her first husband dies, she enters into what would be a 30-year relationship with a white Louisiana man from a noble French background called Christophe Glapion. They're not allowed to marry, as I've mentioned, but they had 7 children together, or in total, and only 2 of those children survived to adulthood. So LaVeau was trained as a hairdresser, and her clients were mainly wealthy white women who felt they could confide in her. As a makeup artist, I can attest that people in the chair often tell you things they wouldn't normally. And I think this added to her mystery for a lot of people wanting to make her out to be the Voodoo Witch Queen. She knew a lot of people. She knew a lot about them. You have that thing where if you've been telling someone personal information about yourself or secret stories, they're always going to have that power over you. So that probably added to her whole witch queen persona. So she's very entrepreneurial, and after acquiring modest wealth, she's known for her generosity and for being a philanthropist. She began practicing voodoo in the 1820s, supposedly, though all accounts are written after the time, or from newspaper articles written by white people, as most people of colour or mixed race were unable to write at the time. Therefore, their written history doesn't start until later. Her position as a voodoo priestess is first recorded in 1850, when it's reported in the local paper that she accused someone of stealing a statue of the Virgin Mary, and in 1859, when the paper reported that Marie and her wenches were continuously disturbing the peace in that of the neighbourhood with their fighting and obscenity and infernal singing and yelling, in the hellish observance of the mysterious rites of voodoo, one of the worst forms of African paganism. More on that later. Her cottage, in which she'd grown up, was in St. Anne, near Congo Square. And Congo Square is this thriving market for people of colour held on Sundays and Mondays, which are their days off, according to Code Noir. For anyone enslaved, that's their time off. And by the mid-1800s, it was more than just a marketplace. It was a community space where people went for anything. And Marie LaVeau would go there, talk to people, offering support, offering protection herbs. And it's in Congo Square that legends began to spread about her singing and performing spiritual celebrations, conjuring the great serpent spirit, becoming filled with the spirit of Aya, and proudly wearing a Queen of Voodoo crown. And these tales appear in subsequent newspapers and serials, and no doubt most of them are exaggerated, embellished, and completely made up. The fear of the unknown is huge throughout history, and the fact that a lot of Christianity is a very quiet, subdued worship. So the fear of sort of what would have been a powerful, exuberant, loud, uplifting, probably, vocal celebration would have just been completely unknown for lots of the white people at the time. So there's one night a year that the Great Voodoo celebration would take place in Congo Square, the eve of the feast of St. John the Baptist, or St. John's Eve, which is an observance of the summer solstice. And this day is celebrated by many different religions and cultures across the world. And in New Orleans, it meant coming together for ritual bathing in sacred waters and communing around bonfires. And like the Sunday Congo Square celebrations, St. John's Eve ceremonies were supposedly led by Marie LaVeau, and it still takes place today. The front room of her cottage, where she lived since she was born, she grew up with her grandmother there, and when it was threatened that she wouldn't be able to afford to live there, her common law husband, Christophe Glampion, bought it for her. And the front of the cottage housed altars with candles, holy images and offerings, and she would lead weekly meetings there for people of colour as well as whites, and participants would dress all in white, they would chant and sing and leave an offering of liquor and food to the spirits. Marie LaVeau also saw individual clients, giving them advice on everything from winning lawsuits to attracting lovers. Interviews with elderly residents in the 1930s recorded remembrance of Marie, which included description of her altars. One in the front room is described for carrying out good luck charms, money-making charms, husband-holding charms. But it also says in the back of her cottage she kept a back room which had an altar for bad work, where she prepared charms to kill, to drive away, to break up love affairs and spread confusion. It was surmounted by statues of a bear, a lion, a tiger and a wolf. Although people of all races visited LaVeau and attended the ceremonies she led, the white community never accepted voodoo as a legitimate religion, which is partly today why it's still associated with the occult. Racism and natural tendency for newspapers to seek out sensational stories led to the descriptions of Marie LaVeau's ceremonies as occult, drunken orgies, and her nickname as a voodoo queen. There's no question she was powerful, dynamic, a natural showwoman, and that is what encouraged the media to portray her as the witch queen. But she also rose to prominence in the community through her good works. She nursed yellow fever patients, posted bail for women of colour, and spent time with and visits with people on death row in their final hours, praying with them, making them food, all offering almost a confessional for them. She would make her clients gris, which are packs of substances used by believers to attain control over others or gain success, health, protection, revenge, or luck, though probably mostly not the bad bits, the good bits. The bad bits have probably been added in. These would include roots, herbs, peppers, sugar, salt, flavourings, animal parts, graveyard dirt, gunpowder, pins, needles, nails, candles, incense, holy water, and images of the saints. It's like an early use of aromatherapy, homeopathy, crystals, and essential oils for a lot of people today. I always have crystals in my bra. I use rollerballs. I have a cold at the moment. I'm taking essential oils for it. I have essential oils burning in my diffuser right now. So I know a lot of people will snortle and think that that's a load of pointless faff, but it works for me. And I think probably similar stuff was happening then, where the thought of carrying around this bag of herbs and stuff was just a sort of very odd thing for some people. Some say that she created circles of deception to make money from people. She would find a girlfriend for a man, tell his wife about it, show the wife how to get her husband back, tell the husband the wife knew of his infidelity, sell them love spells, encourage them to go to her for advice. She'd tell the husband that the wife was looking for him, etc. But there's no evidence of this. This is just hearsay. Some believe that she'd get her male slaves to get up early in the morning and kill pythons or crocodiles leave them on people's porches so that they would then go to her for a protection spell. And there's again no knowing whether this happened or not. It could just be part of her entrepreneurial spirit, and though perhaps not a very ethical, is a way of making a living. You can't kind of sit around and assume people are gonna come to you for stuff, but we just don't know. As with many people who don't fit in with the norms of society, her reputation increased in notoriety after her death in 1881, just before her 80th birthday. Part of the confusion is whether her daughter, Marie II, existed. Marie II has this reputation, again, as being this voodoo priestess. Some people, there is confusion as to what Marie LaVeau actually did and what Marie II actually did. But historians now believe that the lady calling herself Marie II was in fact someone just trading in on LaVeau's name, but with less good intentions, and carrying on this idea of like a powerful voodoo priestess who needed to be feared and respected and who could conjure evil spirits. From what we can tell from the descriptions of her, Marie was charismatic, shrewd, beautiful and powerful. There's lots of descriptions of her walking through the streets where she lived like she owned the place. And I don't think that necessarily means that she's this voodoo queen. I think it maybe means that she was just secure in herself, confident in her abilities, and knew her path. She knew people well from when she was a hairdresser. She was a strict Catholic and a voodoo priestess, and she was confident and dynamic. And we know that women like this seldom get treated fairly in history. The ceremonies that she participated in and often led probably involved singing, dancing, eating and celebrating, and the creation of spells for protection. But what is reported to have taken place is mass orgies, voodoo rituals of sacrifice and evil spells. And as the death of her first husband isn't logged anywhere, which in itself isn't unusual, many believe that he disappeared, with the implication being that Marie had something to do with it, and this just added to her sense of malevolent power. So that's the story of Marie LaVeau. There's loads of conflicting information. I've watched YouTube after YouTube saying that, she concocted evil things and held satanic almost rituals, and that's just doesn't seem to have any basis in history. What we know is that she was a devout Catholic as well as being a voodoo priestess, and the two were not mutually exclusive. Catholicism was forced on all people of colour through Code Noir, but she went to Mass at least weekly, in some accounts daily, and voodoo was almost like a spiritual addition to her Catholicism, where it was a way for her to help people, to provide a service for her community that was created out of slavery and all of these different cultures coming together. And that's the story of Marie LaVeau. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a quickie. As always, I love to hear your suggestions for episodes that we should go into. I'm really on the hunt for a good old haunted house story. So send in an email to themondaynightrevue@gmail.com, or come and find us on Facebook and Instagram, where we are at The Monday Night Revue, remembering that review is spelt REVUE. And I will speak to you next week, hopefully less snotty. And thank you so much for listening. Remember, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.